Hello, in this video and the next few videos after this, I will be creating a third-person controller with a lot of different functionalities. So as you can see, I've already created an environment using a plane and a bunch of cubes. So to start, I'm going to create a capsule and use that as our player. Let's just rename this to player. I'm also going to change the layer for this game object. So for our player, we're going to use a character controller. So we don't need this capsule collider. So we're going to remove that. Let's actually collapse this. And here I'm just going to add a character controller. Let's also go ahead and create a script. I'm going to name it third-person controller and I'm going to open this script. So let's go back to our scene, and here I'm going to attach this third-person controller script to the player. Let's also reset the position of our player. Here it is. And I'm going to bring it up a little bit. So now let's go back to the script. Let's clean this up a little bit. So to start, we need a bunch of variables to control our camera. Let's go ahead and create a region for our camera to keep our code clean. So I'm going to write down a method for our camera. I'm going to name it initialize camera, and I'm going to call this initialize camera in our awake method. We also need 3 transforms in order to set up our third-person controller. And also, let's not forget, we need a reference to our camera. So we're going to create a variable of type camera here. And in order to allow the user to be able to change this variable, I'm going to make them serialized field. So the first thing we're going to do in the initialize camera, we're going to lock the cursor. And we are checking to see if the camera is null or not. If it is, then we're going to just choose the main camera for our camera. Now that we have our camera, it's time to create our transforms here that we defined. So now we need to parent our variables under each other. Now we parented our transforms. Let's set their position according to the variables we defined. So here we set the local position of our camera snap and make sure this is minus camera distance. We are also setting the camera offset and camera height, which I explain all of this later. And I also like to set the camera near clip plane here. So let's go ahead and start our game. As you can see, a camera root, a camera pivot, and a camera snap has been created for us. Let's check out the camera root. As you can see, it's been positioned exactly to the position of player. We're gonna make sure the camera root follows everywhere that player goes. This way, the camera follows the player. And here's the camera pivot. So camera pivot is going to be responsible for our vertical look. By changing the X value of our camera pivot, we're going to be able to look up and down. And as you can see, this is the camera snap. Let's actually create a cube under this one to see how it moves if I move the camera pivot. And in order to look around the player, we're going to rotate the camera root around the y-axis. So basically, whenever we want to rotate around the player, we're going to change this value. Whenever we want to look up and down, we're going to go to camera pivot and change this value. And whenever we want to change the distance between the camera and the player, we're going to use the camera snap. And we're going to change the Z value. Also, we can change the camera offset and camera height using pivot. How it's going to work? By changing the position on X. As you can see, this is going to move left and right. For example, you have a third-person shooter. You want to shoot from the right corner. You change the camera to the right side of the player. Whenever we want to shoot from the left side of the corner, we're going to move the camera to the left side. And also, we could change the camera height using y-axis of our camera pivot. For example, whenever your player is standing, we choose a certain height. Whenever your player gets crouched, we're going to reduce this number to make a better effect. So let's go ahead and put all of this into our code. I will create another method here and name it camera update. So update camera. Let's create the update function. And here in the update, I'm gonna call update camera. We're also going to be needing the late update, so let's actually go ahead and create that one too. And let's also create a late update for our camera. And let's call this late update from here. Now let's start by going to our update. So obviously, the first thing we're going to do, we're going to set the camera root position to the position of our player. This way, the camera root always follows the player and have the exact same position as the player. Now let's get some input so we could move the camera around. As you know, you could get the mouse input using getAxis mouse X. This is the default value for Unity mouse input. So to continue, we need a float. Let's create a float here and name it camera angle. This angle is going to be our vertical angle, which is going to be set for the pivot. We also need to limit the vertical movement of our camera, and we need to define some bounds for it. So let's create two variables, a minimum angle and maximum angle, to control the limits that our player can look up and down. So now let's go back to our update function and we're going to set the camera angle here. Here also we can clamp the camera angle to make sure it doesn't go outside of the limit that we've defined for it. So we're going to use clamp for this. And we're going to clamp between minimum angle and maximum angle. We could also add another variable here, called it sensitivity, to be able to control the speed of our camera. Let's actually go ahead and create it. Now we can go ahead and multiply this value by camera sensitivity. And finally, we're going to set the camera pivot local rotation here. So this way, we're going to change the vertical look of our camera with the input Y. Now we need to change the horizontal rotation using the input X. So for this one, we don't need to define any limits. So easily, we could just rotate the camera root. And easily we're going to rotate around the up axis with the input X multiplied by sensitivity and time.delta time around the self. So after all of this, we need to make sure the camera follows the camera snap. So we're going to do that in the late update. Let's go ahead and find the late update that we've created, and we're going to follow the camera snap using our camera. So we're going to use lerp, and we say camera position, lerp that towards the camera snap position. And here we need to follow speed. Let's create a variable for follow speed and rotate speed. So we create a camera follow speed and camera rotate speed. Let's go back to our late update, and we say camera follow speed, and we multiply it by time.delta time. Now let's go ahead and also lerp the rotation of our camera. And here we're going to lerp the camera rotation towards the camera snap rotation using camera rotate speed multiplied by time.delta time. Now let's go ahead and check out the result. As you can see, I can move around my player and move up and down with a limit. So there is a small problem though. Let's actually play at the game again. As you can see, I'm gonna move around with my camera. Now let's actually grab this wall and bring it forward. Now, if I move my camera here, it's just going to go behind the wall and I won't be able to see my player again. This is an issue. So to solve this, we're going to create a camera collision. So let's go back to our code. And here I'm going to create another method called camera collision. And we are going to call this camera collision in our update function. We also could call it in the update camera. That would be even better. Let's actually call it here. And now let's go back to our camera settings and create a variable, a layer mask. And I'm going to name it camera collision layers. So let's go back to our camera collision method here. I'm just going to use raycast. So I'm going to cast array from the pivot in the direction of minus our camera forward, and I'm going to save the hit, and the maximum distance is going to be camera distance, and I'm going to use camera collision layers. And here also I'm going to add an else, and let's create a vector 3 here, and this camera snap target is going to be set here. So we're going to cast array from our pivot towards our camera snap. If it hits something, we're going to use that position as the hit point, and if it didn't, we're just going to use the position of camera snap. And here in the late update of our camera, in the lerping the position, instead of using camera snap dot position here, we're gonna change that to camera snap target. So now let's go ahead and check out the result. And before you do, let's go ahead to our player here and actually set the layer for it. It's going to be everything except player. Let's play, and let's bring the wall forward. Now let's check this out. As you can see, the camera is not going to behind the wall, and it stays with the player. So in this video, I set up the camera of our third-person controller, and in the next video, we're going to go over the movement of our player, gravity, and some other functionalities that's going to be very useful. Please make sure to hit the thumbs up if you liked the video, and please subscribe to get notified about my future videos and also support me to create more videos. Thank you for watching.